Well, what is up? Awake. This is fun, isn't it? This is different. We're in circles. We're in the auditorium. We don't know what's going to happen. Like, why are these tables set up? What's coming? Oh, you're in for a real treat tonight. Hey, if you don't know me, my name is Cub. That is a nickname. My real name is Jacob. The story behind that is I asked my wife out on our first date, and she looked me dead in the eyes and said, no. And so I was heartbroken. I was like, oh, she seems special. I gotta know what went wrong there. Later to find out, it was because her twin's name is Jacob, which wouldn't it be weird, right? Like dating someone that your twin's name has the same name. Like, what a real bummer. Well, once I found that out, I was like, so I still have a chance? Is that what you're saying? I just need to change my name. And so from then, I have been Cub. And I will always be Cub because my wife refuses to call me Jacob. So that is the story. You can call me whatever you want. I have 100 nicknames. I'll answer to whatever, but I'm so excited to be here. This is so fun. I've been told that you have been binging through the Bible this semester. Is that correct? Give me a head nod. Yes, okay. And you've been in the Old Testament, right? You've been learning about all these different people, real life people, there's some crazy things that happen in the Old Testament. Some crazy historical occurrences that happened before Jesus came. But isn't it so cool that everything in the Old Testament points to a coming one? And so we've been going through that all semester, and tonight, oh, that's why we're here. That's why we're celebrating tonight. We get to the good part, Jesus. And so some of you are like, yes, we're done with that was crazy. The Old Testament, we're done with the Old Testament. We're in the New Testament. And I say, wah, wah. We are still in the Old Testament tonight. But did you know that Jesus is all over the Old Testament? Which, of course, you know that because you've been binging through the whole Bible. You've been binging through the Old Testament. And so tonight, what we're going to look at is someone who predicted that there would be a coming one who would bring peace, healing, goodness that only he could provide. So in the Old Testament, God called several different people to be his messengers. I'm sure you read about several. If you learned about this person during the semester, raise your hand. Some of them you probably have, some of you haven't. So different messengers of God was Jeremiah. Did we learn about? Okay, we got some maybe. Jeremiah. Ezekiel? No. Okay, Daniel? How do we kind of learn about Daniel? Oh, same time. Okay, you had the choice. Okay, Daniel, Hosea. You did. Oh, just her. Okay, I like that. Joel? Yeah, okay. And tonight, we are learning about this guy named Isaiah. Everyone say Isaiah. Isaiah. Yeah, we got Isaiah right here. And Isaiah 53 is where we'll be tonight. You have a sheet in the little middle console, cool, gray-looking thing you can pull out. It has the entire chapter right there in front of you. So get this. I know you got your paper, you're getting all that, but I need you to hear this. Isaiah 53 was written 700, how many years? 700 years before Jesus came. 700 years before Jesus was born. That's a long time ago. Yet, it's all about Jesus. 700 years before Jesus, yet it's all about Jesus. And that's why this is easily one of the most fascinating chapters in the Bible. This is the most, in the New Testament, it's the most quoted Old Testament chapter. So what's happening here? How can that be so? Well, this thing called foreshadowing, where it's something predicted or told that's going to happen in the future and is later fulfilled. And we know all about this because we've seen movies. Like a good movie has some good foreshadowing. Now, Spider-Man 2, so not Tom Holland, before that. Not Andrew Garfield, before that. Yeah, we're going way back. Tobey Maguire. Anyone seen the old Spider-Man? Okay. Number 2 was Doc Ock. And at the beginning of the movie, he says, he realizes that these robotic arms, like tentacles, right, are evil, and that they should be at the bottom of the river. And at the end of the movie, he's the only one strong enough to destroy this reactor fuser, some really villain thing, that he's the only one strong enough to destroy it. And so they destroy it, and with that, he has to sacrifice himself. And you see the last scene of him drowning at the bottom of the river with the robot. So something that was once said was later fulfilled. Now, this is a little more obvious one. Wizard of Oz, anyone? Anyone? Wizard of Oz? Now, that's old. That 1939, I think. Like, really, really, really old. But we all know it. Dorothy, Toto. They had this neighbor that was super mean and hated Dorothy and Toto. And so they get in, like, this altercation, and Dorothy says to the mean neighbor, she's like, "You are a witch." Well, guess what? Would she get hit in the head or something? Something happens, like tornado, and she wakes up in this dream, and little do we know, the same actress that she called a witch ends up being the Wicked Witch of the West. It was this foreshadowing. So that is what's happening in Isaiah 53, is like we're learning all about Jesus 700 years before Jesus comes. And so what Isaiah is doing is it's a long book, okay? There's a lot of chapters in Isaiah, and what he's been doing up to this point is he's contrasting two different servants. Now, one servant is Israel, and he's basically saying that these people of Israel have not quite lived up to who God has called them to be. And you've been learning about this. Abraham was super faithful, but he did not quite live up to a coming one, right? That is talked about. Moses was this amazing leader, but fell short. David, you learn about David? David, yes, he was this amazing king, but fell short of the coming one. Solomon had this wisdom like never seen before, it said, but fell short. Wisdom was not enough. But then Isaiah starts to talk about this different servant, this coming one, that would fulfill everything God had in store. So we could spend like forever in Isaiah 53 because every verse is just so rich, and I can't wait for you to get into it. And you're at your table, you're going to have the time to read. It's not a very long chapter. You're going to have the time to read through it completely. And then you're going to discuss it at your table. But before we get there, I want to give you just some examples. You're like, what do you mean? Like, exactly how does Isaiah predict of this coming one? So there's several different, I'm just going to give you three examples. And the first is this servant that Isaiah is speaking of is a suffering servant. So in this chapter, you're going to read like, whoa, there's just like this extra level of pain and misery. And it's honestly kind of shocking to read. And if we go just before Isaiah 53, so Isaiah 52, just two verses before 53 begins, it says, "But many were amazed when they saw him. His face was so disfigured, he seemed hardly human. And from his appearance, one would scarcely know he was man." And so now fast forward, we see this fulfilled when Jesus comes. In the New Testament, we see that Jesus was wrongfully accused. And this guy named Pontius Pilate, he knows that Jesus is innocent. But the crowd was so angry that Pontius Pilate didn't want to make the crowd angry. And so he has Jesus tied to this post and whipped. And at the end of this whip, there's these little fragments of bone and glass. And so, can you imagine? This whip was just like sticking into the skin and like tearing apart Jesus's body. And they yelled, "Crucify him, crucify him." It wasn't enough. And so then, once again, Pontius Pilate gives in and has Jesus nailed to the cross, crucified. And if you look down and find verse 5, we see where this is exactly what Isaiah said about this coming one, this servant. "Pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole." He was a suffering servant, is what Isaiah was saying. So think about this. The Father's only Son was sent for you and me. And Jesus was God and human. And his love was so great for us. His love was, think about this for a second. His love was so great for you. God was willing to be publicly humiliated in front of everyone. And I just think about all the pain, and I mean, take away the pain. Just think about how embarrassing and how humiliating that would have been. But he did that for you and me. And so, yes, many people would read this and say, wow, this is how gruesome. But as believers, we know that Jesus had a plan to rescue us. His blood set us free. And so, yes, gruesome, but at the same time, it's amazing to just realize how deep God's love is for us. And so he was a suffering servant. But then Isaiah also speaks that this servant is a silent servant. And now this is honestly amazing just on the front end. Like if we don't even get it, like this is amazing because when I'm sick, I'm anything but silent. Like I'm the loudest sick person. I have no pain tolerance. So if I have this little cold, I'm just like, Cora, I need, Gator. I'm just like the worst sick person. Anyone like that, you turn into a different person when you're sick. Like you need a Snickers, Like it's just, I got some finger pointing back there. Yes. But Isaiah, he predicts that this servant would be silent. And so look at verse 4. It says, and as a sheep is silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. Now fast forward, we see this fulfilled in Matthew 27, verse 12. I think it's up on the screen. It says, but when the leading priests and the elders made their accusations against him, Jesus remained silent. And Isaiah 53, I just think is cool in itself because it speaks as if it's already happened. We know it hasn't yet. This is before Jesus, but it speaks as if it has already happened because God is so sure that his plan is going to happen. All powerful, all knowing. And Jesus trusted the Father so much. He didn't get down on his knees and beg Pontius Pilate to please, let me go. No, you have the wrong person. No, he trusted in the Father's will. In the Old Testament, this Old Testament passage is so clearly points that God is the author of life. God is the author of all things because there's so many details that you just can't make up. So many details. 700 years before Jesus came, there's this guy named Isaiah. He couldn't have made this all up. No, this points to that no one could have predicted this. God always had a plan. And so this servant that Isaiah is speaking of is, he's a suffering servant. He's a silent servant, this chapter says. And then the last example I want to give you is he's a substitutionary servant. Romans 3 says, for everyone has sinned. We believe that. We have all fallen short of God's glorious standard. And so someone reading Isaiah 53 would be asking, wait a second, how can a sinner be saved? How could an upright person be made right with God? And we know now on the back end, Jesus is the only way. But then they would not have known. But Jesus came, a perfect, sinless one, who is both God and human, and he bridged the gap for you and me. In Isaiah 53, now look at verse 11. It predicts just this. Look at that. It says, and because of his experience, my righteous servant will make it possible for many to be counted righteous, for he will bear all their sins. So here it's saying the servant must become the substitute. It's the only way. And the heart at what we believe as believers, the heart at what we believe as Christians is that Jesus paid for our sins. This is what happened on the cross. Jesus said, give me all of their bad, all of it, all of their sins that they have done, that they will do. I am paying for all of their sins. And instead, the coming one, the perfect one, the one who has never sinned, give them all of my good. That is the miracle of the cross. He is a substitutionary servant. And so just to recap, like this is what Isaiah 53 is. 700 years before Jesus would come, it predicts of a servant whose sacrifice will pay for the penalty of our sins. And now we are able to have peace only through him. Jesus did what we could not do ourselves. No money, no good deed, only Jesus. As you just think about this, isn't it incredible that like this is speaking of the coming one 700 years before? This passage is just mind-blowing. And like I said, there's so much more. And so what I want you to do, we're going to put a little music on in the background. I want you to read through the whole thing because I just hinted at a couple things that it points to. But everything that you see that points to Jesus, because it never mentions his name exactly, but everything you see that points to Jesus, I want you to circle it, underline it, and then your tribe leaders are going to lead you. Once you do that, your tribe leaders are going to lead you through some discussion points. So I'm going to turn that over to you guys to read.